Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Pruning and Maintenance Basics for a Water-Wise Garden. My name is Kristen Bowman, and I'm with EB Mud Water Conservation Division, and I'm here with my colleague, Alan Aki. Many of you tonight did submit questions. You're very curious about how to take care of a water-wise garden. Of the 400 people who registered for this event, we got about 300 questions. So part of what we did tonight was really shape this presentation around what you submitted. So thank you so much for your curiosity. In addition, there is a Q&A dialogue box at the bottom, and you're welcome to submit questions there. We may have some time at the end to talk about, answer some live questions. And Alan will also be looking at the dialogue box and answering some questions during the presentation. In addition, just to let you know, you don't have to take furious notes or anything. We are going to be sending you the slide deck and also the recording, and also a lot of links that you can take a deeper dive in some of these questions you have about taking care of a healthy water-wise garden. So just a couple other things about a few other logistics. Everyone is on mute. And this is a recorded presentation. So by participating, you do agree to be on a recorded webinar. At the very end, you'll see a survey, and it's just a 2-question survey. And if you could take a minute to fill that out, that would be super helpful. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We loved reading your questions and see that, taking care of a healthy water-wise garden is something that people are really interested and curious about, and we're very inspired by your curiosity. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dave Phelps. Dave is a landscape architect, a garden coach, and the founder of Garden Enlightenment. He's really a wealth of information and knowledge and experience with taking care of and designing water-wise gardens here in the East Bay. And he's going to walk us through some basics, pruning basics, and fall garden care. So with that, Dave, I'll pass it on to you.
Hey, okay. Can you hear me all right? Fantastic. So we're going to dig in here to pruning and garden maintenance basic for water-wise gardens. What I'd like to do is start out as I always like to see how Oprah Winfrey starts her meetings, is what is the intention here, and kind of set the stage. We are, as you guys all know, stewards of our gardens and of the planet. Everything is connected, and we want to really respect that interconnectedness within each of our gardens and between all of our gardens. So really the intentions here is to hopefully get a real handle on what we're looking at for fall garden maintenance, and to establish a mindset and an intuition. That's my real hope, is that you can walk out into your garden and intuitively know what action steps you want to take. And of course, we're going to focus in on pruning and talk about the systems, goals, and concepts of that. But of course, we also want to save water. And so to do this, we want to think about assessing your landscape. When we get into fall and winter, but really starting in fall, assessing how things are going is going to be key to establishing and continuing to improve the landscape. Looking at these tasks, talking a little bit about seeds, mulching, fertility, all of that, and then of course more pruning, cutting stuff back. And get into the nuts and bolts of how much, how to, and why. So when I think about maintenance and gardening, one of the ways to look at it is similar to what we call integrated pest management, or IPM. And integrated pest management has tenets or practices. We want to know thy plant and know thy pest. We want to set thresholds in landscaping or gardening. It would be aesthetic thresholds. We want to monitor the situation, and then we want to take action steps, hopefully multiple synergistic action steps. And then, of course, see how things do and record those and iterate going forward, getting better and better. So going back to that first one, right? Know thy plant. We want to look at the plants in our landscape and really get a handle on whether they are annual, biennial, or perennial, whether they are woody or herbaceous. And then looking at our grasses, sedges, and rushes. That maybe they're succulents. Maybe you've got some herbaceous plants, vines, shrubs, trees. What kind of plants are we looking at? And then this is a big concept here. We'll go over this some more. But are they Mediterranean or summer dry plants? Or are they more of an eastern kind of summer wet plants? Usually, the landscapes that I see most often, there's kind of a mix of those. And you prune and maintain those and irrigate them quite differently. When we talk about Mediterranean plants, that would include all of our California natives, a lot of those would go into summer dormancy. Just because, here we get all of our rain during like 3 months, and then we've got 9 months of hardly any precipitation. And the other thing is whether or not they are pyrophytic, which is fire loving. In other words, did they evolve or co-evolve in a fire ecosystem, like a chaparral ecosystem? Do they have a taproot? Is it a corm, a bulb, a rhizome? Are there tubers involved? Are they grafted? And we'll go into this in a lot more detail. How about some disease and pest issues? And we want to look at our landscape and see if there were any fungal, bacterial, or insect issues over the last season and make adjustments to that. How about frost hardiness, water quality issues, and then what I like to call plants in the way issues. We all like to design our landscape such that the mature width of the plant doesn't impede on circulation routes, be they vehicular or pedestrian or other circulation, but sometimes plants really take off and they do get in the way. So we're going to be looking at the plant function, right? Architect Louis Sullivan, who was the mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright, once said that form follows function. And what we want to do is really look at our landscapes and see, well, did the plants perform the function? Similar to like these olives up here, they were probably put to screen a view. So did that work? Were they an accent plant, a filler, or a spiller? Now, what do I mean by that? Look at this container here, right? So here we've got some Teucrium cassonii. Did it spill over the way we thought? Did the accent work? Maybe you've got part of your landscape is a food forest. Did you get the production? How about flowers, the timing? Think about the life cycle of these plants and whether or not you had a succession of seasonal interest or color or fruit. Are they evergreen or deciduous? And does that matter? What is the lifespan of plants? Some plants reach their end of their lifespan after 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years. So knowing that can really go a long way towards planning for what to do this fall and this winter. And then we'll look at hard pruning or rejuvenative cuts. So another tenet that we might look at in IPM would be to use the least toxic controls first. In other words, do the least harm to the ecology. And this is really important to look at to see if we don't want to be too clean is kind of what I'm thinking. A lot of people have the idea that they're going to go in and fall and clean everything up. But we don't want our gardens to be that sanitary. We want to recognize that we've got beneficial insects in there and we want to prepare winter habitat for those as well as pollinators. We do want to clean our tools though, and that's really important when we think about pruning. And so we might go ahead and soak them in a soap. We might use some paint thinner or some bleach or something of that nature. If you're using something harsh like that on your pruning tools, you always want to follow it up with a little bit of a lubricant like WD-40 to keep your tools in good shape. So again, we're not looking for sanitary gardens, but we are looking for clean tools. We want to also think about this concept of niche habitat management, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but how about circulation? You know, if you participated in the program of turf reduction, and in place of that turf, you went ahead and put in pathways and drainage and plantings, maybe some boulders, did it work? You know, did the circulation work for you, your pets, your cars? How about the view shed? Do you still have perhaps something you want to screen or a view you want to accentuate? So how about fire safety? You might look at your zone 0 within the first 5 feet of your structure or out at 30 feet and identify items you might want to adjust. How about the plant and soil health, the irrigation? In other words, what we want to do is before we jump into fall here, how did the spring and summer go? You know, and be honest, there's no shame or blame here, but did it work? You know, and how can we make changes to make sure our gardens are increasingly getting better and supporting our lives and making happy gardeners? So if it didn't work though, there is something I want to say here. You might want to just have some patience before you go in and dig up and replace everything. There's a concept called sleep, creep, leap that is really, it has to do a lot with a lot of our plants, Mediterranean, California natives. A good example here, the Ceanothus maritimus, where you plant a 1 gallon of that and it's going to sit there for a little while before it starts to creep. And then eventually, though, you have to have some confidence. They do leap and they take off. And this is the case. So patience before you replace. Let's just talk about some basic concepts for fall garden maintenance. The big one here is cutting back on irrigation. And really, at this stage of the game, we'd be turning it off entirely. And then we're going to look at getting in and doing our deadheading and chop and drop. The chop and drop mentality is really where you can take prunings of your plants and put them right around the base of the plant, because that kind of mulch is going to be ideal for the plants in your garden. We're replenishing mulch. We've got a target of 3 inches. And then we want to look at dividing plants. Maybe collecting some seeds, maybe going and actually seeding some areas. Weeding is a huge issue because right now all of the weed seeds are now germinating. And this is a great time to go in and, similar to IPM, where you want to use the least amount of effort to get the most bang for your energy, we can really take out a lot of weeds with a little bit of effort this time of year. And certainly we want to take out any weed seeds before they disseminate in our gardens. Planting. Fall is a great time to plant. They're not going to do that much, but they will get established, and those new roots are going to get in there and start growing, and it really sets them up through the winter rains to have a really exciting spring and summer. And of course, yeah, we're looking at pruning. Now, just another concept here back to the irrigation. When you look at the year and you look at how many hours of daylight, here in the fall, we've got roughly 2.5 less hours than we did in the sun in the summer. So come into November and December, we are going to turn off the irrigation, right? You turn the dial to off. And this chart is available on the East Bay Mud website. And as you can see here in November, it is time to turn off the irrigation entirely. So let's look at pruning seasons, right? If we look at the summer solstice and winter solstice, we have cycles, we have our seasons. The key point here is that when we're looking at pruning, right after peak bloom and then during late dormancy are the two best times to prune. The thing with our Mediterranean or summer dry and a lot of our California natives is that the dormancy period is during the late summer and into fall. And so we've got a period there right after bloom and before they put all their energy into seeds, it's a good time. And then another sort of a longer time during the later part of the fall where we can get in and do our pruning. And so that's a little different from your eastern plants that really are best pruned more a little bit later. But as you can see, our summer dry plants, when they get our rains, they start to germinate and grow through that period of time. So that gets us to what we call the fall doldrums, right? Because when things are dormant here in the late summer and early fall, where, if you've got a purely native California garden, it's generally they don't look that great in that time of year because everything is summer dormant. So what can we do? Well, we can add a little bit more water and keep them hydrated. We can cut them back strategically to encourage them to put on new fresh growth or second blooms. We can also go in and use some other non-native species, other Mediterranean plants that have a low WUCOLS or a low water use rating. We can use evergreens, late bloomers, look at colorful foliage and texture, get into some variegated plants, and choose plants that are garden hardy cultivars. Another fun thing is to look at plants from the other hemisphere. Plants from Australia and New Zealand, a lot of these plants have their hemispheres a little confused, like this Hardenbergia that blooms like in our winter time. But we're also looking at Cistus, Teucrium, Westringia, Grevillea, Nepeta, Coria, Limus, Halictotrichon, Achillea, Leucadendron, Loropetal, Lomandra. There's so many plants. This is just a short little list of plants that offer a little more bang in those summer doldrums when our California natives are a little on the golden brown side. Let's talk about mulch. Now, this was a question that we had at a previous webinar where someone saying, well, I don't know if I should take up the mulch and lay new cardboard down, for sheet mulching, or if I should lay cardboard over the mulch and put top of it. So, the question I think, or the answer would be, well, is the mulch the source of the weeds? And how thick is it? Again, we're shooting for the magical 3 inches of mulch. That's going to give us the most water retention and the most weed suppression. Mulch is going to essentially decompose and get absorbed into the soil in roughly about 1 inch a season in our climate. And so I like to plan on replenishing it about 2 inches every 2 years. Now, again, with fire danger, we're looking at using gravel or decomposed granite or something like that, some non-flammable mulch within the 5 feet of a structure. We don't want to have any big wood chips if you've got any little dry stream beds or bioswales, because they will come up and float and can clog our drain inlets. We don't want to use shredded bark because that's a fire hazard. Again, the best mulch to use is arbor mulch. Really, it's what comes out of the back end of a chipper. And this has got a mix of little twigs, leaves, stems, bark. It's a wonderful mix of your greens and browns, big pieces, little pieces that are going to decompose and be the best mulch source to replenish the nutrients in your soils. Again, every 2 years. Here's an important note though, for your woody plants and especially, right, oaks, manzanitas, madrones, things like that, we want to keep the mulch away from the crowns. And what we want to look for is the drip donut. So, what's a drip donut? Well, we all love donuts, right? Well, think about a heavy fog hitting a shrub or a tree, and then those water droplets dripping down. That is going to be where most of the feeder roots are. And that's also where we would want to concentrate any nutrients, any compost, and our mulch. So we're going to keep the mulch away from the crown and concentrate it at about 3 inches within the drip donut. This is also the perfect place if you're adjusting your irrigation to put a spiral of inline drip tubing with a flush valve. That sort of system can easily expand over time as the tree or shrub matures. Now, when we talk about fertility and fertilizer, if you put in the proper amount when you planted it, you probably don't have to fertilize at all. The important point I want to get across here is to avoid high nitrogen, highly soluble and available fertilizers this time of year because it can kick plants into new growth. And right before our potential frosts and cold temperatures, we don't want to do that. It can also trigger fresh growth that is going to just be insect fodder and fungus food. We want a nice slow growth. We want slow availability. And so when we look at fertilizers and organics, especially all of the meals like feather meal, bone meal, blood meal, insect frass, these things all have low NPK or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And some of these are complete fertilizers, which would be good. So something like EB Stone's All-Purpose or Down to Earth BioLive. This is my favorite lately because it's nice low, it's a complete, and it has endomycorrhizal inoculants. Great stuff. So what we're looking for is biological release. In other words, these fertilizers are not available to the plants right away. They have to be acted on by the soil ecology and then released to be available slowly to the plants. So let's get into pruning and cutting back. I want to make the point that grasses, sedges, and rushes are not the same. Here we have some Chondropetalum, the South African plant, the Cape rush, that was, I don't know why they did this. So you do not want to do this to your sedges and rushes. The only excuse to do that might be if it got severely frost damaged or something of that nature. When I look at this scenario, I think, okay, let's take advantage of this and let's divide these guys. These are big clumps and we've got a big open area. I see exposed drip line. I see weeds. There's not 3 inches of mulch here. That looks like ½ an inch to an inch. So we're going to apply another 2.5 inches of mulch. We're going to divide these guys up and we're going to fill this area. Remember when I said niche habitat management? This is a habitat niche, and something is going to grow there if it's irrigated or if it gets rained on. And so we want to take advantage of that space and put something that we want to grow. So more division. Here we're looking at Douglas iris. This is a great plant, right? And they've got the little rhizomes. So a plant like that, you could probably make 5, 7 divisions. Yarrow, the Achillea, another fantastic, easy plant. This, you could probably make 20 divisions out of this clump here. Salvia spathacea, the hummingbird sage. You got to be a little bit more careful but with this one, but they also divide very easily. So look at your plants, and fall is a really good time to get in there and think about dividing them. When we look at grasses, we want to realize whether they are warm or cool season. A warm season grass grows during the summer and is completely dormant in the winter. A cool season grass is going to be evergreen throughout the whole season. And so with the warm season grass, like a Muhlenbergia or a Calamagrostis, you're going to cut it back pretty severely, back to like 3 to 4 inches. Whereas the cool season grass, we're going to do combing or light grooming, and that would be something like Halictotrichon, Festuca, or Nasset about Mediterranean subshrubs. This is a not really woody, not really herbaceous, but kind of in between there. Something like our salvias or like lavender. A lot of people complain that, my lavender just doesn't last very long. Usually the issue with lavender has more to do with the soil and the drainage than it does the pruning. If you're trying to compare it to something from Provence. But the point here is that with these plants, you really only want to take out the deadheads, right, or the spent flowers, and the top 25% of the green leafy growth. Right? You never cut these plants back to a stem where there are no leaves, because that stem will just die back. Now, you can go in with some things, especially some of our pyrophytic plants that have co-evolved in that chaparral plant community, because they are used to having a fire come through, and they usually have a swollen crown. Here's a great quote from Las Palitas that I like. It says, "Pretend you're a deer or an elk and eat the parts of the plant that bug you." And so that's a good way to think about that. They're going to eat just the tender tips, again, that 25%, so that you go in there and you're just taking a little bit and you're allowing the other lower buds to branch out and grow. Now, if we do talk about more woody plants, like your manzanita or your oaks, these plants are going to essentially prune themselves in that they are going to put out a canopy that's going to shade the lower branches. They're going to naturally die back. And really, your job is just to go in there and reduce the fuel load. You're going to take out all of the deadwood. And perhaps shape it to remove some of the crossing and rubbing branches. When we get into more herbaceous plants, like this epilobium up here, again, remember the summer doldrums, right? Our native plants don't look that great in late summer, but you can go in and cut these guys back very severely. Here you can see next year's growth is already popping up. We've got last season's stems here. So we're going to go in there and take those stems out pretty much at the ground. Whereas somewhere in between, again, a subshrub with the Salvia alpiana, we don't want to cut back in there to those stems. We want to only remove about 25% of the green leafy growth. Some other examples here. Here we've got Eriogonum or the buckwheat. It can get quite messy. You can take it back a little bit, or you can go a little bit harder, so long as you've got these little buds and growth here. Those are going to come back and it's going to look wonderful. When we get into our larger salvias, like the leucophyllus, we do not have to prune them every season, but every few seasons you can head them back pretty severely and rejuvenate them. So that would be more of a rejuvenative cut. When we talk about Rhamnea or the Matilda poppy, these guys, they like to be cut back to about 18 inches, and then they just explode with new growth. But you want to be mindful and look in here at the buds that are coming out of those stems. When we look at our smaller salvias, like the micrantha, the microphylla, the greggii, a good example would be hot lips, one of our favorite plants. They can survive with some pretty harsh pruning. So when they look all ratty like that, you want to cut them back pretty severely. But ideally, you cut them back so that there's still a little bit of that bud, of that growth, right? When we look at Mexican sage, the Salvia leucantha, you don't want to prune it now because there's still probably quite a bit of bloom left. They like to bloom late into the season, and that's important for our hummingbirds and pollinators. So you wait until the blooms are all done, and then you go in and remove all those stems, and do not cut into the green new growth. You want to allow that to come up naturally. Here's some other examples of some salvias, some parafskia, where you're cutting back to those buds. These are pretty severe. And then we've got a moonshine yarrow, where we're cutting back all of that growth to the next season's growth that's coming up from the ground. Again, consider perhaps dividing something like that. Here we've got Diplicus, our sticky monkey flower. This would be in that subshrub category where you're cutting back about 25% of that green growth and leaving some of that growth. Now, when we get to something more woody, like the Rhamnus or the Frangula, they can have, you can prune them back pretty good, and they will, here's the quote, back bud, or they can have buds that come out of the internodes. But essentially, you'd be pruning these guys just to try and control their overall form, or maybe open them up a little bit for some airflow or sun penetration. When we look at some of our large deciduous shrubs, like the ribes, now we're really going to look at a rejuvenative cut where we're not really going to head them back so much as we are going to go in and selectively take out older canes. So when we look at something like the sambucus or our elderberry, or, we're not really planting buddleia so much anymore, but pruning these guys back pretty hard because they will come back with a lot of growth, and doing these rejuvenative cuts where you're taking maybe a third of those canes out each season. So you go in and you take out about a third, and then another third, and then the third year you're taking out the remainder. This is considered a rejuvenative cut. When we talk about a real hard cut, as an example, I'm going to show you here an Escallonia hedge. Right now, hopefully we're not hedging our plants anymore or turning them into any boxes or spheres, and it's certainly not our Abelia. But this one got hedged and hedged and hedged. It's also moderate water use, so we're not planting those anymore. But they are a good example where you can go in and make a really hard cut, and then you see how they respond, and then they come back and they actually look like a normal shrub, where you can go from a hedged plant to what we call natural pruning within a season. So another pruning method is deadheading. And that deadheading is really taking the spent flowers and just remember that plants, for them, they want to grow and they want seeds. They're thinking progeny. They want to put out their seeds for new plants. But if you deadhead, right, if you go in and remove the seeds, it will put out another bloom, perhaps, or at least keep the energy for next year's growth rather than putting it all into the seed heads. So like this Jerusalem sage, the phlomis, we're taking off those seed heads that aren't so aesthetic, and the energy will go into the new growth. With something like Nepeta, you can cut that back really hard right after bloom, and you will get a second bloom. Now, if you want seeds, you would want to let them go to seed. And then a good practice here would be to cut off the seed heads, put it in a Ziploc baggie, kind of crunch them up a little bit, and then you can sow these. And fall is a great time to do your seed collecting, and actually late summer. Ideally, you get your seeds before everything is all wet. Um, but then, here, so we've got Eriogonum, the buckwheat, the grandilia or gumweed, a Schultzia. You can put these little guys in the bag, or even go and gather some of our larger ones, like our chestnuts or our acorns. Here we've got milkweed. The Asclepias is a great plant to collect, because if you can collect these guys and get them in a flat or something, you can actually grow out a lot more than the plants would be able to do on their own. And then you could prick these out and divide them and get them into the landscape. You can also go to various resources to purchase seeds, either the plants, the wildflowers, or native grasses. But you want to get them right before the rain and rake them in, or do a light top dress, because the birds will get them. Rule of thumb with this is 3 times the diameter. So remember that Eriogonum, right? Look at that. So 3 times the diameter that we're looking at, trying to get 1/8 of an inch of cover over those guys. So briefly on winter pruning. And I know we're really talking about fall, but I want everyone to be very mindful that when you're looking at stone fruit and some palm fruit, there is the potential to spread bacterial or fungal diseases. And we want to be careful not to prune right before or during a big rain event. So now we get into the fun stuff, the 3Ds. Remember, we were talking about pruning systems. So with pruning systems, we want to jump in there and do these no matter what. We've got dead wood, diseased wood, and damaged wood. We want to always take these out. So you don't have to sit there and think, oh, what am I going to prune? I don't know. Yeah, just go in and take out the dead wood, the diseased wood, the dead wood. And then we're looking at suckers, water sprouts, crossing rubbing branches, double leaders, and narrow crotches. And we do that, then, the rest becomes self-apparent. So safety first, right? If we've got hangers or things that are going to fall out of the tree, or clearance for fire safety or circulation, that comes first. Kind of fun, right? Well, along with the 3Ds, there's the 4th D, which would be deranged or dysfunctional. That would be those crossing or rubbing branches. And then we've got the 3Cs, competing, crossing, or crowded, or the 3 S's for safety, sight lines, and shape. So here we've got a double leader. This is going to create included bark, and it might rip out later. Here's a deranged wood, one of the 4Ds, right? We might have a damaged wood. We might have diseased wood, a crossing or rubbing branches, water sprouts, suckers, or something that is safety. It's in the way. More hangers, more water sprouts, more suckers. We go through and we take out the damaged wood, the diseased wood. But we want to be careful too, because, if that is, there's a chance that might be fire blight or Erwinia. If it is, we want to make sure we've got a clean tool, cut it and see, we might have to cut it back further if we've got discoloration there. So identifying the graft union, if a plant is grafted, is really important. When we look at this tree here, we can kind of see a little swollen spot. This is a scion, and this is a rootstock, and that is a sucker. And it's going to take the energy out of that plant. Here we've got a graft union right here. That's a sucker. That's part of the rootstock, not the selected cultivar. Again, here's a graft union. These are suckers. Graft union, scion, rootstock, sucker. So always remove the suckers. On a rose, it's usually pretty easy to see. Either there's no graft joint and they're on their own roots, right? Like a Cecil Brunner or something of that nature, or a Mutabilis. But a lot of our Floribundas and Grandifloras are going to have a graft, in which case, if you've got something coming out from below there, you want to dig down and prune it as close as you can. Water sprouts are all these vertical growths that come up on the lateral branches, your scaffold branches. Now, if you've got a big hole in the canopy, you can utilize one of these and head it back and have it fill that canopy spot. But in general, these water sprouts are what we call epicormic growth, or adventitious buds. And so they are very shallow within the tree and they're weakly attached. And when they get laden with fruit or a big wind hits them, they tend to rip out and damage the bark. So I want to go in here real quickly and talk about meristems and apical dominance. So the plants have meristems where they are actively dividing at the very tip of the plant, at the tip of the root. And in these apical meristems, there is a hormone called indole acetic acid that is produced, and it goes down the stem and it inhibits lateral bud growth. When you take the little tip bud out there, the apical dominance stops and you get the lateral buds start to grow. And that is the way to get bushier plants, the way to get more flowers. And so we go in there, and this is really good, especially with summer thinning and trimming. You can go through and just take out those apical meristems and the terminal buds and get much bushier plants. So we want to know the difference between the terminal or apical bud, the nodes. The internode is between that. And then for some fruit trees, you want to understand the difference between what was this year's growth, last year's growth, the year before that, because that might have a big impact on what wood the plant fruits on. Basic pruning cuts, we don't want to leave a stub. We want to make a nice clean cut, usually about 1/8 of an inch behind a bud or a lateral, and then slightly sloped away, right? So this is the wrong direction. This is too close. This is flat. This is a stub. That's a spike. This is pretty good. Yeah, that's a stub, slapped the wrong way, too close. The only reason you do this is if it is opposite. You see, you got your buds on either side, but on alternate, this is the right way. And you want to use a bypass pruner. A bypass pruner has got a blade and a hook. What you want to do is put the blade against the part of the plant you're going to keep, and then the part here that's on the hook, that's going to be damaged. That goes in the compost or the mulch. So let's talk about pruning types of cuts. Two main kinds. There's the heading cut and the thinning cut. With the heading cut, you're cutting back to a lateral, and you want to think about sap flow. You want the lateral to be at least 1/3 the size of what you're cutting so that it can take the sap flow and then seal that wound. With a thinning cut, you're taking the entire branch off at the branch bark collar, right? So again, looking at the sap flow, you want to cut here so that this is at least 1/3 the size of what you're cutting. Now, when we make a good cut, we are encouraging the plant to seal its wounds. We heal, we replace cells. Woody plants can't replace their cells. All they can do is seal up those damaged and decaying areas. But if you make the proper cut right at the branch bark collar, this takes advantage of the tree's natural ability to make a callus roll and seal over that wound very quickly. So that's what we want to do. It's a process called the compartmentalization of the decay zone in trees. And you can look up Dr. Shigo if you're interested in that. So the 3-saw cut. This is a little counterintuitive to folks that just come up to a branch with a saw. The intuition is to just start cutting from the top, but we don't want to do that. The first cut is from the bottom, and then we come around on the top and we make the second cut. This arrow should really be up here. And then the branch is going to rip back here and come off, and then we take this last little bit off with a good cut right at the branch bark collar. So once again, first cut below, second cut on the top, and then the final cut here to encourage that callus roll and sealing that wound. When we don't do that, if you just start cutting from the top, the weight of that branch is going to rip down into the trunk wood and expose that trunk to pathogens and decay organisms. An awful scenario. So we really want to make sure we are not creating that seam. And you can do multiples of these, right? The first and second cut, you can start way out on a limb and make a bunch of those until you get back so that you can kind of handle that and make your final cut. We don't leave stubs or spikes. You can see here where the callus roll is trying to seal, but it can't because we've got a stub and the decay organisms get in there. Here you can see the callus roll is trying, but it's a dead stub there. So no stubs, no spikes. So the system, right? You get in, you do your 3Ds, you do your suckers, your water sprouts, your crossing and double leaders, all that. Then we're going to come in and prune, right? So clean, thin shape. We're looking for air penetration, sun penetration, pruning for natural predators. In other words, if you've got things like thrips or homopterous insects like scale or aphids, can the natural predators, the birds, get in there and eat them? We want them to be able to access in there. If there's fungus, like sooty mold or powdery mildew, that sort of thing, if we got airflow and sun, we're going to have less fungal issues. And then we get into the aesthetics and looking at symmetry and the golden ratio. So a little bit about aesthetics, looking at layers and focal points and trying to accentuate the horizontal, right? The idea here is sort of like genus loci and the spirit of the place. When we're landscaping, we want to unleash the spirit of the plant in its natural shape, form, and silhouette. And we do that by cleaning it out, thinning it, and shaping it. You work from the inside of the plant out, right? You don't start pruning the tips. You work in from here. And this is after you've done the 3Ds and all those things. I wanted to talk briefly about Japanese maples because a lot of you asked about that. These are medium water use plants, so they're probably not in your low water use garden, but these are opposite and that they change, right? So the buds go this way and that way and this way and that way, and you can go in and either take out the center one and branch them for a spray, or you can lift them by pruning back to the upward bud or downward. So this is directional pruning, using the direction of the bud to try and accentuate these horizontal layers. And of course, looking for those conflicting, crossing, rubbing branches. And you might even get so far as to say, you know what, I want a focal point here, here, and here, and with some layers in between. So back here to suckers, red buds, purple leaf plum, crab apples, Bradford pears, locusts. These are some of our ornamentals that will sucker. Here we've got a fruit tree with two really big suckers coming up. This is classic when you get into citrus. You see the three leaves there? That is the trifoliate orange. That's a dwarfing rootstock, and they taste horrible. And you don't want to leave that. It'll take over your plant. So you want to make sure you take that out, right? And you want to look for the graft union, and you want to make a good clean cut so that the callus roll can seal that wound right away. Another thing about citrus, because a lot of you asked about that, the thing with citrus is that they grow in flushes. They grow up and then they hang down and they shade out. And what you want to do is as they start to grow up and come down, you prune that out to layer them so that you get more sun into the lower canopies while protecting the branches from sun scald. So again, you're looking at they're going to flush up, they're going to hang down, and you want to trip those such that you get sun penetration into the lower levels, the layers, without hitting the big scaffolding branches because they are very sensitive to sun scald. A lot of you asked about olives, and it depends on the function. Remember Lewis Sullivan, right? Form follows function. If you're looking for fruit, that's totally different from if you want a screen, right? If you are looking for fruit, here's a good one, polyconic vase pruning. I love that. So the idea is to have some symmetry and then allow the sun penetration to get in to these cones of growth. And that is going to give you the most amount of fruit. Now, olives are very, very resilient. You can prune them pretty much any time of year, and you can prune them really hard. So certainly you go in and take out the suckers and water sprouts, but they are tough. That having been said, here's the kind of golden rule, is that you never want to take out more than a third of the leaves or the photosynthetic ability of the plant to create sugar at any one time. It's like taking sugar away from a kid. They freak out, right? So you don't want your plant to go into a shock situation because they can't make enough sugars with photosynthesis. So you only take out about a third or less each time. And here's my pet peeve, right? We need a law against this. First of all, not planting the wrong plant, right? I mean, look, this is Fraser's Photinia that gets about 12 feet wide and 12 feet high, and they've got it 2 feet from a curb, and then they're hedging it. What plant is this? That's Nandina. It should be a crime to do this to Nandina. So I am hoping that we are going to get away from this because there's no sun penetration. The natural predators can't get in there. There's no airflow, and we've just got a bunch of lumps and bumps. So no hedging and be safe.
We have like 5 minutes.
Very cool. Okay. Um, so don't set yourself up to fall, right? We want to get up and prune our trees, but we want to make sure our pruners are sharp and clean. If you're dealing with any wires, if you've got even a Romex cable coming in, that you want to consider that live electricity. Don't prune alone. Don't prune in the rain with ladders. You don't stand on top of a ladder. I think we all know that. 8 feet in the trade, if you're over 8 feet, you've got a different insurance rate. So think about that, right? And never, of course, run with pruners in your hand. And I gotta just say, if you've got a big tree project, don't try and do it yourself. Reach out to a certified arborist because they have chippers and they do this all the time. What you can do is you can ask them to drop the chips in your yard and use it for mulch. And at this point, I think I am going to let Kristen take over and tell you about the East Bay Mud rebates.
Well, thank you, Dave. That was so informative and gives us all a good starting place and things to think about when we're moving forward with our pruning and water-wise gardens. And I think we'll have time to answer a few of the questions in the Q&A. But before we get to that, just for some of you who might be thinking about converting a lawn to a low water landscape, EB Mud does have rebates for people in our service area. We have a standard rebate, which is $1 per square foot, and a super, which is using native plants and sheet mulching, which is $2 a square foot. And we also have a program to help you with the design portion of it. And these are resources we're going to send you as a follow-up email, but there's so many excellent resources. We have a garden EB Mud Water Smart Gardener webpage with plant lists and planting guides and plant design templates and YouTube playlist with like, a deep dive on sheet mulching and irrigation. We also have a firescaping booklet. We'll send that along. We'll send the watering schedule that Dave talked about. Calscape, if you haven't been there, it has, you can look at all kinds of native plants on this database, and it also has a maintenance tips for the different native plants. So you could look up whatever plants you have and see what kind of maintenance tips they offer. We're also going to send you some contact information for the master gardeners, because a lot of the questions that came up, I think, would be great for the master gardeners of Contra Costa and Alameda counties. So with that, I would like to just move to a few of our questions. Does that work, Dave?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we've gone over assessing your landscape and how it's going, looking at the maintenance tasks, talking about seeds, mulch, fertility, cleanup, pruning, and cutting stuff back. I'd be curious to know what some of the questions are.
Yes, let me go ahead and read that. How hard should you cut back over the winter for newly planted plants in the first year?
So newly planted plants in the first year, you may not need to cut them back at all. I would just say, remember that slide about apical dominance, where if you can go in and just take the apical buds out, what you're going to do is encourage more lateral bud growth, and you're going to get bushier, lower, probably nicer formed. But then go in and do your 3Ds and your crossing branches. Uh, but really, I would then also look at the function, and how tall you want that plant or how wide you want it to be. So there's no really hard rule on how much and what year. It has more to do with the function and certainly not taking it back more than a third.
Yeah, maybe the first year just waiting and watching would be a good thing, seeing how it grows, right? Because it might leap. What's the best way to get rid of thrips and establish plants?
With thrips,
Yeah.
Thrips, well, again, you'll usually find thrips on the underside of leaves, and usually they are back in the shadier spots and moister spots. And so the idea of opening up the plant to more airflow, more natural predators, and more sunlight is going to make a big difference with that. If you really have a big problem with thrips, I would look to plants that harbor them. And those are usually your rhododendrons, your ferns, your azaleas, your, viburnums. And if you've got a whole bunch there, then you might be able to make a big impact by perhaps using a oil, like a neem oil, and spraying the undersides of those leaves. So again, thinking about the life cycle of the pest and where they overwinter. And so they're going to overwinter on those dark, cool, damp little spots on the insides of the leaves.
Great, thank you. When do you prune pomegranate trees?
Pomegranates sucker profusely. And so I would prune a pomegranate like 3 times a year. And they respond very well to that. It is very hard to establish a single trunk or even multiple trunks with those. I would shoot for probably 3 to 5 main trunks and then really just look at the crossing branches on those. And they tend to send up water sprouts that you can head back. So you don't, it kind of depends on your ultimate size, but I would want to keep a pomegranate down so that I could pick it ideally and not have to get out a tall ladder. So cutting back those big sprouts and encouraging them to sprout out. This is a good plant for keeping it out of the way because, as you guys probably know, the pomegranate has some really sharp thorns, and you don't want those next to your pathways. So any branches that are headed out towards a path, you'd want to head those back and do directional pruning to direct the growth back away into the planting area.
Terrific. Thank you. I just want to let folks know we are at time at 7 o'clock. I think